Yes, I am dressed as my interpretation of a historian and/or a professor for reasons that will be revealed in due time.
Also, can we get a little commotion for the earrings? I just own these.
Hi, hello, welcome back to Mia Likes Movies. My name is Mia and I do like movies. I like a lot of other things too, but Mia Likes Movies just sounded the best. Today we are back in front of the plain white wall to dive right back into Faerun and Baldur's Gate 3. Talk about one character in particular. Astarion. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Oh Jesus, here we go. I promise. It's not what you think it's gonna be. Or maybe it will be, but stick around. Maybe you'll like it. So I really wanted to explore how Astarion, for lack of a better term, became TikTok's White Boy of the Month or White Boy of the Year after Baldur's Gate 3 had its official full release in August of 2023. If you are unfamiliar with the term White Boy of the Month or White Boy of the Year, it's a phenomenon on TikTok and other social media platforms, TikTok in particular due to its rapid pace and trend cycles, where a certain white man, I don't know why I put that in quotes, they are white men, dominate the For You page of most women due to the algorithm. Even if this white boy is not particularly interesting or even talented due to their average to above average looks, they quickly become insanely hyped. This continues until another White Boy of the Month comes along thanks to a new movie, album, or game being released. The most synonymous person with White Boy of the Month, I would say, is probably Timothée Chalamet or Tom Holland, to name a few. Astarion may not be the most romance character overall, according to Larian Studios, but he seems to be on TikTok. At least that is what the abundance of short video essays, edits, and hashtags and mentions suggest. I mean, we've all seen the edits, but why? Why did Astarion, out of all of the romance options, seem to become the most popular, at least on TikTok? Why is he sexualized in a way that the others are not? This video is not going to be a literary analysis of Astarion, but rather a historical and cultural analysis of the tropes that he embodies. If you are looking for a more literary analysis that focuses on him as a character and his storyline, I will link some in the description below that I recommend. We will obviously talk about Astarion as a character and his storyline, but specifically only in the context of how they may or may not embody trends and tropes seen throughout history. Does that make sense? Let's talk about Astarion, a historical and cultural analysis of the sexualization of vampires through TikTok's favorite twink pale elf. Now that the introduction of this cursed 5-paragraph MLA formatted essay is out of the way, I must remind you to like and subscribe. Now, on to the real stuff. I took my glasses off to not only show that time has passed, but also they're not real. They're blue light glasses and they hurt my eyes. And they also had a glare, so here we are. All cultures throughout the globe seem to have their own versions of vampire legend and lore. The earliest legends associated with what we would nowadays call vampires tell of demons and witches that consume blood and flesh of dead and living mammals. Sometimes these legends coincide with those of werewolves, shape-shifting beings that drink blood and can turn into wolves or butterflies or name another animal. Rarely were vampires seen as hot or sexy in folklore. Often they were described as being bloated, demonic, and, to put it quite simply, ugly. Our modern Western interpretation of the vampire did not seem to come around until the early 19th century with the publications of John William Polidori's The Vampire in 1819, Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897, and Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla in 1872. It is generally agreed upon by all that Bram Stoker's Dracula is what truly spawned, pun not intended, a distinctive vampire genre. But before we dive more into Dracula specifically, let's take a brief pit stop into the rise of the horror genre and its themes of sexuality. The beginning of the horror genre is credited to The Castle of Otranto, the 1764 novel by Horace Walpole. The book is set in a haunted castle and included some of the first occurrences of what would then become certain horror tropes, such as secret passages, clanging trap doors, moving pictures and paintings, and doors closing by themselves. This novel would inspire many writers, including but not limited to Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, and yes, Bram Stoker of Dracula fame. According to the Vox article entitled The Horror Century by Asia Romano, the Castle of Otranto is teamed with homoerotic symbolism, which is often interpreted as an externalization of the author's grappling with his sexuality. Romano also writes that from the time of its publication through today, horror has contained an element of internalized fears and phobias, shames and anxieties, made external and visualized. Sometimes we're able to overcome them, sometimes they overcome us, and often the monsters turn out to be regular people like Horace Walpole grappling with his queer identity in a homophobic society. Dracula was directly influenced by Horace Walpole and his work, The Castle of Otranto. Much like Walpole, Stoker was also allegedly homosexual, and specifically in the closet. He was a family friend of Oscar Wilde, a more out queer Irish writer. While he never explicitly stated anything about any sort of attraction to Wilde, it is assumed. Stoker also did write very homoerotic letters to Walt Whitman, another allegedly gay writer. Please, I beg of you, Google these letters because you need to read them. It is way better than me describing them to you. Just read them. The phrasing is so yearning. It's so yearning. It's giving yearning. All that to say, Stoker was obviously struggling with his sexuality, but was conforming to the standards of his times. Besides this, Dracula also has major themes of sexuality and gender. After all, Stoker was writing during Victorian times. His novel reflects the rigid expectations put upon Victorian women's sexuality. The depictions of Dracula and his minions feeding can allude to the exchange of bodily fluids and intimacy found in sex. Even the stakes driven through the various characters that are staked can be interpreted as phallic. I mean, it's an intimate sort of penetration to stake someone in the heart or throat, is it not? And before I move on, I would be remiss in my duties as your homosexual horror historian if I did not mention the original toxic yet controversial bisexual Lord Byron and his unintentional impact on the horror genre. Lord Byron was an English poet, politician, soldier, and folk hero, in a way. Born to a scandalous and rich family, Lord Byron would soon follow suit. While in school, Byron's family remarked of him getting distracted from his studies by young women and men. I should note that many of the relationships throughout Byron's life were controversial for many reasons. For reasons that the YouTube gods may not like. I'm keeping this all lighthearted for the sake of a point later on down the road, but note that Byron was a toxic bisexual icon derogatory and not a toxic bisexual icon non-derogatory. I must note that many thought that Byron was charismatic, handsome, and interesting. He was very popular in high society throughout the time. In 1812, Byron proposed to Annabel Milbank, a rich and smart philanthropist. They would marry in 1815, and their daughter Ada would be born the same year. A fun fact is that Ada would become a mathematician and writer and is often considered one of the very first computer programmers. Ada would also be Lord Byron's only legitimate child. The marriage between Byron and Annabel would last only about a year, as Annabel would suspect Byron was hooking up with his half-sister behind her back. Awkward. After ruining his marriage, Byron fled from England in shame, never to return again until after his death. In the summer of 1816, not too soon after his split from Lady Annabel, Lord Byron settled in a villa by Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Joining him was his personal physician, John William Polidori, and if you've been paying attention, you may recognize this name. Polidori is the writer of the 1819 novella The Vampire, which, as a reminder, was published prior to Dracula. But still, we will get to that. While staying at this sexy little villa, Lord Byron would befriend many other writers and artists, including Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, and Mary's stepsister, Claire Clairmont, which I love that name, by the way. Allegedly, Byron was hooking up with Claire. Allegedly. Byron invited the Shelleys, Clairmont, and Polidori over to this villa. Due to horrible weather, these four were trapped inside the villa for 3 days. To have some fun, Byron suggested a sort of contest where each would write their own scary stories to present to the others. This is where Mary Shelley would birth the beginnings of her iconic novel Frankenstein, which I'm actually reading for the first time right now. Really excited to get through it. I don't know why I said it like that. Apparently, according to Mary Shelley, Polidori wrote a really shitty story about some skull guy thing. Lord Byron wrote what is known as a fragment or fragment of a novel, which Polidori would then use as a direct inspiration for his next project, The Vampire. Polidori was allegedly in love with Lord Byron, and the plot of The Vampire also had homoerotic undertones. In the introduction of Lord Ruthven, the titular vampire, Polidori writes about how many of the women in the town attempted to woo him, including one known as Lady Mercer, and in regards to Lady Mercer, the common adulteress, Mercer, could not influence even the guidance of his eyes, and continues to point out that while not indifferent to women, he just rarely addressed himself to females. Are you getting what Polidori and I are putting down here? Allegedly, Lord Ruthven is Polidori's literary insert of Lord Byron. The other main character, Audrey, who is a handsome and wealthy orphan, seems to be Polidori's self-insert. Throughout the short story, quote, Aubrey becomes fascinated by Ruthven and obtains approval to accompany the Lord on his travels through Europe. End quote. A lot more happens and women get involved, but trust, there is a lot of homosexual themes and undertones throughout. I've linked the short story below in the sources section if you're curious and want to read it for yourself. It's a relatively quick read. I go on this brief tangent to solidify to you all how Lord Byron is, in a way, the archetypal image of our modern interpretation of vampires. All because some gay and depressed writers got together and had a little writing party in Switzerland. And as we continue into the 19th century, there was a popular genre during the Victorian era known as sensation novels. These were extremely popular with female readers. Books in the genre often depicted adultery, kidnapping, and murder in domestic settings. And it's interesting to note how women's interest in true crime and the macabre has always existed, even back in the 19th century. I also want to mention that political interpretations of vampires, associating aristocracy and capitalism as feeding on the weak and sucking the life out of the poor, rose during this time. This happened to coincide with the Enlightenment era, the rise in industrialization, and the overall decline of folkloric beliefs within the general public. However, around this time, there was also mass hysteria throughout Eastern Europe regarding supposed revenants, their interpretations of vampires. This mass hysteria would spread from Eastern Europe all the way to America. It's not a coincidence that most vampires depicted in literature are usually depicted as part of the upper class. Thematically, it all just kind of makes sense, and it was all happening at the same time. Women's sexuality and queerness are innately connected to the history of horror, and specifically modern interpretations of the vampire. This is only solidified more as we get into the 90s and early 2000s, but let's circle back and relate all that we covered so far back to Astarion. After all, that's why we're here, is it not? Astarion is a Byronic hero. According to dictionary.com, the definition of a Byronic hero is as follows. Byronic hero is a type of fictional character who is a moody, brooding rebel, often haunted by a dark secret from his past. The term describes the type of main character found in many fictional works by Lord Byron, who is said to have had this same type of personality. Dictionary.com also states that Byronic heroes are characterized by having several particular traits. They may be angry, rebellious, seductive, and struggling with vices. They usually have high intelligence and emotional awareness, which tends to make them brood and be outsiders from society. And the Byronic hero is often tortured by guilt or a secret from his past. Other Byronic heroes you may be familiar with include Hamlet, Rochester from Jane Eyre, and even Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights. So does all of that sound like any sexy vampire twink elf that we all know and love? Astarion is moody and brooding, haunted by his abuse of his vampire master, Cazador Czar, as well as the horrific atrocities that he, Astarion, would commit in his name. Astarion is angry at many things, but specifically Cazador for very obvious reasons. Astarion is also admittingly rebellious. Not only is he more neutral to evil aligned, rebelling against what is generally considered morally good in order to satiate his obsession with freedom, and a valid obsession with freedom, I might add. But he also has a history of rebelling when he was enslaved by Cazador. Astarion can confide in you about times he was punished for speaking out of turn or refusing a task set forth by Cazador. Through exploring Cazador's castle, you can find various notes that support these claims. Obviously, Astarion is seductive and struggling with vices. Well, he is struggling in his own unique way. Due to his past, he often seeks comfort and safety in drinking and sex, but he does not particularly enjoy them. If you get close to him, he can reveal that he does not think he wants to be seen as a sexual object at all.
I don't think I want you to think of me in terms of sex. I don't know if I want anyone to.
So in a way, as I said, he is struggling with vices. And while he may only have a +1 to intelligence canonically, he is by no means stupid. And in his 200 plus years of living and seducing others, he has a keen sense of emotional awareness. After all, you have to have some sort of emotional awareness to continuously and successfully seduce and coerce dozens of innocent people to essentially go to their deaths. And you may think I'm beating a dead horse here, but Astarion truly embodies the textbook definition of a Byronic hero. And this is made even more concrete when made aware of Lord Byron's own history within the vampire genre. You can't get to the modern depiction of vampires without Lord Byron. And on top of all of this, Astarion and the Tsar Mansion allude to the Gothic Victorian aesthetics, again, aesthetics that are intrinsically tied to the history of the genre. If it wasn't clear before, we can't have Astarion without the toxic, controversial, bisexual icon that is Lord Byron. They are basically the same, minus some things. Did I mention the half-sister thing? That's weird. We don't talk about that enough. But what does any of this have to do with Astarion becoming TikTok's white boy of the month? Well, I'm so glad you asked. If you want more of a deep dive on how we go from the Victorian era to the 90s, check out Shanspeare's video essay, The Evolution of Vampires in Pop Culture. Consider it a sort of prerequisite for this section. Thanks to The Vampire Diaries, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, True Blood, aka The Southern Vampire Mysteries, Twilight, and more, millennials and older Gen Zs have cultural touchpoints for sexy modern vampires throughout their lifetimes. Nostalgia is a powerful drug, and your sexual awakening as a young girl can be confusing. Seeing a sexy, shirtless Edward Cullen sparkling in the blue-green forests of Forks, Washington at a young, impressionable age, 9 years old, may imprint on one's brain. The key word there is may. I don't know who that sentence is about. I don't know who wrote that.
This is the skin of a killer bone.
These modern, I guess I should say contemporary vampires would not and could not exist without homosexual icons Horace Walpole, Lord Byron, John William Polidori, and Bram Stoker. And although TikTok is often associated with its predominantly young Gen Z and Gen Alpha users, there are, unfortunately for us all, a large number of millennials and older Gen Zs on the platform. Actually, most users on the platform are between the ages of 25 and 34, at least according to this one article that I found. So, of course, a lot of content on the platform is going to be created by and catered for this specific age group. White Boy of the Month originated on Twitter, but soon moved to TikTok, as all things on social media tend to. According to an article written for Teen Vogue entitled Twitter's White Boy of the Month, it's a very long title, the origin of the White Boy of the Month meme has roots in, unsurprisingly, Stan Twitter. On the meme's origins, the writer Gabe Brigado states, Twitter's White Boy of the Month has deep roots in Twilight actor Rob Pattinson, who was the pinnacle of romance and attraction during the heyday of Stephenie Meyer's vampire fantasy series. This also fulfills the digital aspect of the role on a rudimental level. The first Twilight film came out in 2008, just as social networks such as Facebook and Twitter began to become popular digital destinations where people could share everything from their innermost thoughts to innocuous ramblings about guys they thought they were cute. Is anyone surprised that this meme has a deep history with horny Twilight fans? Anyone? And interestingly enough, you could argue that Edward Cullen is a Byronic hero. I won't, but you could. Everything comes back to Byron. Twilight's impact on social media, and specifically women's relationship with social media, cannot be understated. In the 2010s, you could not go on a corner of the internet without the Twilight series being mentioned, for good or for bad. I mean, how many blank is still a better love story than Twilight memes can you remember seeing on Facebook? Maybe you're too old for Facebook. I will cry if that is true. An article on thepublishingpost.com writes, quote, for a few years, Twilight seemingly dominated a cultural discourse on popularity versus quality, a discourse which, with hindsight, was fueled by and large by sexism and a strange but vehement need to dismiss anything liked by teenage girls. Twilight took over the internet because the internet was growing. Young people had unmonitored access to the internet, and men generally hate women. Young women that loved Twilight ran to the internet to share their love of the franchise. Men would share how much they hated this trend, or girls that were not like other girls would share how much they also hated this trend because internalized sexism. This would cause Twilight to be pushed to the tops of people's feeds and algorithms, causing more people to get invested. It's all cyclical. But again, how does this even lead to Astarion taking over TikTok? Well, first of all, thank you for keeping me on track. Second of all, everything. In an NBC article, Callahan Rosenblatt writes, from Edward Cullen in the Twilight series to Brad Pitt's Louis de Pont de Loac. I don't know, guys. In the film Interview with the Vampire, vampires have long been considered pop culture heartthrobs. Fans say Astarion is different because they have an active role in romancing him and choosing how his story plays out. In Baldur's Gate 3, players are given significant freedom in the way they interact with the companions who join them on the game's quest. This means they can also explore romantic relationships with those characters, which can change how the player and the characters interact over the course of the game. In an interview with CNN, Victorian literary historian and an admitted fan of Astarion, Rachel Stewart states, "The allure of the Byronic vampire comes with a sympathetic quality to them, that they struggle with their own status as monster and have a heart underneath all that blood. Whether you want to marry Astarion, be his therapist, project your own issues onto him, or merely wallow in the angst, he's got you covered." And you know what? She's got a point there. She sure does. Polygon even has a whole article published that is titled "Astarion's Charms Convinced Me to Play Baldur's Gate 3, which is all about how the writer, Anna Rice, played Baldur's Gate 3 after getting inundated with Astarion content on their TikTok For You page. #Astarion has over 500 million views on TikTok. 500 million. Some of those videos are witty one-liners, edits. Others are literally just him staring into the camera with a sexy song playing in the background. Cue the edit. Over 1 million views. 1 million views. Astarion is almost like an amalgamation of everything chronically online millennial and Gen Z women have been obsessing over ever since they created their first post on Tumblr. A hot, brooding, gothic, pale, sensual, yet deeply conflicted vampire. Neil Newbon's voice acting is just the cherry on top. Sexy and earnest, witty and vulnerable, all things that are a part of the female gaze. As soon as the first Astarion edit dropped on TikTok, it was over. It is the perfect collection of centuries of erotic horror and sexuality being molded through the female gaze and spit out on the internet. Hopefully that all made sense. Looking at my script, we are about 10 pages into this, and I truly did not mean to dive this deep. If you are still here, thank you for watching. Hopefully this unlocked some part of you that you didn't know about before. You know, maybe you didn't realize that all of your favorite characters were Byronic heroes, or perhaps you didn't realize that the reason you like the horror genre so much is because you repress your sexuality. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, this is a reminder to like, subscribe, comment. I thank you again for being here. For $2.99 a month, you can become a Mia Likes member. There are a couple of perks involved with that. You get priority reviews on your comments. I will review them first and comment back first. You also get an exclusive community tab that is for members only posts, where we can chat directly, and you can also influence what content gets put out next. You can also get a shout out at the end of all my videos, which leads me to this week's shout out. Thank you, Xylort, for being a Mia Likes member. I appreciate you always. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. I love you all so much. Let me know what you want to see next in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.